Everyone, and welcome to an Unearthly podcast. An Unearthly podcast is a Stars End production, can be found on stars-n.net, madmadinc.wordpress.com, and fantasy and sci-fi love and news and reviews. Today we're going to be talking about An Unearthly Child, the first episode of Doctor Who, and our introduction to the first Doctor. Who wants to start?
I will. Um,
Okay, go ahead.
I did just a little bit of research on the history of them making the show, basically, and them getting to the point of making this first episode. Um, so basically, what was going on is that Sidney Newman took over the post of head of drama, and he was doing a bunch of stuff, and they realized they needed to bridge a gap between a sports show and a pop music program on Saturday evenings.
Sports show was the or was the Saturday football?
Right. Um, and Newman was throwing out a bunch of ideas before deciding, oh, I'd like to do a science fiction show. So they started developing that, and he was working with someone. Uh, it just says Wilson, what I'm reading. I don't. Wait. Donald Wilson, head of the BBC script department. Um, and so then they were working with various things, and Wilson was meeting with C.E. Weber. And they developed an idea for a series called The Troubleshooters, about three scientific consultants, a handsome young man hero, a handsome, well-dressed heroine aged about 30, and a mature man, 35 to 40, with some character twist. Newman wasn't entirely happy with it, but he really liked the idea of the mature man. And so he decided, oh, he should be a frail, grumpy old man called the Doctor, who's stolen a time machine from his own people. So then they started developing this further, and eventually had a premise about these. They had four principal characters: a 15-year-old teenage girl, and then her two school teachers, and then the frail old man lost in time and space, called Doctor Who. And the idea was that he would be amnesiac, and the others would therefore christen him Doctor Who. He seemed to have some undefined enemy and is searching for something as well as fleeing from something. And then they decide. So Weber started working further on this idea, and they started working on the first episode. And Weber decided there would be two secrets of Doctor Who. The first was that the Doctor had fled his future era to seek the perfect society in the past. Therefore, he'd be very antagonistic towards scientists and inventors, and even try to stop progress. And the second secret was that the authorities of the future were trying to stop Doctor Who from eradicating their own time. Newman didn't like this so much, particularly because he wanted Doctor Who to have an educational bent. So he felt the Doctor should actually ally with scientists and progress, and be okay with that. And then that's when Newman decided to become more involved in the progress of the show. And then so they're working on it again, working on it more. And eventually they get to a pretty good point, and it's much closer to what we think of it now. And eventually Weber is dropped, and Anthony Colburn, who was working on another story for the show, took over and started rewriting it, and eventually wrote what we now know as Unearthly Child and The Tribe of Gum, or 100,000 BC, or whatever you want to call it, all of that stuff. It's then that Verity Lambert is taken on as the producer, and David Whitaker is taken on as the script editor. And it's Lambert who casts most of the principal actors. Particularly, I found it interesting that Annette Wills and Jackie Lane, who later became companions in the show, were both considered for Susan, but ended up not getting it for various reasons. Then they filmed the pilot, And it should be noted that they wanted this to come out, and I think in like March or something, and it kept getting delayed until finally airing in November. They filmed the pilot, and then for various reasons, they decided it needs to be redone. Newman didn't like how unlikable the Doctor was and asked that he be softened a little. There were a couple mistakes that had to be smoothed over, and so they reshot the episode, and it aired the day after. The day after the assassination of JFK. So yeah,
Yeah,
and
it's nice to note the date. It was November 23rd, 1963. The world was still in shock over the death of JFK, enough that about 5 minutes of the beginning of the episode the episode was delayed about 5 minutes um, for a news bit on progress with the JFK assassination.
Mm.
Also, to set the tone for the era, it was the day after the Beatles had released their second album. So they were currently chopping the charts.
and it's about I think 3 weeks before they break it out in the USA.
About that, yes.
Yeah.
About a month or so, yeah.
I know it because it occurs 2 days before the second episode of the Daleks. I was just reading up on that, so.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah.
It was worth it that this episode was aired. The first episode of this was actually aired twice.
Mm-hmm.
On the 22nd, and then before the episode was aired the next week.
Mm-hmm.
Just because of that preempting.
Okay.
This is unusual in that particular day and age because at that point, Doctor Who was going to be scheduled to be aired every week. It was a serial, and they really didn't worry about repeats in serials back then.
The main reason was that they felt not many people were watching it because of the JFK assassination, where they felt that was overshadowing it. They decided so that people would be caught up more, they re-aired it the following week.
Well, considering at what that particular day was, it was 24 hours after JFK had been killed and 24 hours before Lee Harvey Oswald was shot.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of like right in the middle of the whole thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. I would also note that I know little tidbits about how BBC ran things back in the day, and apparently there's some sort of thing with the Actors Guild where they actually got paid extra if they reran a previous episode.
So they were paid by the amount of airtime, regardless of whether it was repetitive or not.
Yeah, so BBC actually had to pay the Doctor Who cast extra for re-airing that episode.
I know there was a political clause that was similar to that in California.
I can't remember where I heard about this, but I remember it being from one of the Doctor Who DVDs, so that's why I have to note it. Because they would keep that up, I believe, until at least the 70s.
Because there used to be a clause in California called fair screen time that you were allowed at least as much airtime as your opponent. I know this because I remember on a different fan base, I remember talking a talk with George Takei once. Takei. And he ran for mayor of a town once. And his opponent cited that clause and brought up every single appearance that was, in the constant reruns of Star Trek at the time. And so while Takei got to be Sulu and didn't make a point, his opponent got to make all these political speeches and airtime. Takei lost the election.
Yeah, that's kind of rubbish.
Yeah, it is. But it's how things were done, 60s and 70s.
I'm surprised he didn't win just on account of being Sulu.
You would have thought so, yes.
So Doctor Who.
First tangent.
First tangent, then we
For the
haven't talked
record,
about the main plot yet.
For the record, the first episode of Star Trek had, let me see, how many years before it aired now?
Will be between the first episode of Doctor Who and the first episode of Star Trek. About 4.
Yeah.
So Doctor Who was already on a second Doctor by the time Kirk made his first trip on his 5-year
Here
mission.
we go. September 8, 1966. So
66?
2 years.
3 years, huh? I thought it was 4. I thought it was 67.
So was that 2 years, 10 months? No, 2 years, 10 months. Am I doing that thing? I'm just trying to do the math really quickly in my head as I'm speaking.
My Doctor trivia is slipping. Wow. Never thought I'd see that.
2 years, 9 months, and something teen days. So Doctor Who is definitely the kickoff, if anything, of what would be building up for the next few decades.
Mm-hmm.
Sci-fi television-wise, at least.
Well, at this point, American TV really didn't have science fiction. It was showing westerns, I think.
Mostly, and that's what they would actually do a lot of to begin with for the most part anyway.
What's that?
That's what American television would do for the most part anyways.
Yeah.
At least until the late 70s. Even Star Trek was technically cowboys and Indians in space.
Bonanza and stuff. But really, there wasn't a lot of American sci-fi between the Flash Gordon era and Star Trek. A couple of odd shows, but then we had Star Trek and Lost in Space at more or less the same time. Whereas England had just gotten off of Quatermass in the 1950s.
Oh, right, yeah.
And was really kind of looking for the next Quatermass.
I should really see those.
And the thing is, of course, today you ask the average American, and they go, "What the fuck is Quatermass?"
I've heard of it through James Ralph, the guy who does the Angry Video Game Nerd.
Yeah, but I'm talking the average American. You don't qualify that.
Aww.
What the hell is Quatermass? But they will probably have heard of Doctor Who. They probably won't have seen it, but they've heard of it.
Of course, Doctor Who ended up nicking some of the plots from Quatermass.
Oh yeah.
I believe Silurians is the one that's primarily a rewrite of Quatermass in the Pit, isn't it? Something like that. One of them.
Era, I think, stole ideas, if not plots, from Quatermass because of
of course the reason for that was that they realized they kind of constrained themselves with how many plots they could do when they were exiled to Earth, so they had to start nicking other people's stories.
Yeah, well, that was the thing. That was the Earth defending Earth from an alien invasion, and that was a Quatermass staple.
Right. So this story.
Really look, Doctor Who is littered with liberal thieving throughout its entire history.
Oh yes.
In fact, once Star Trek had aired, they stole a little bit here and there from Star Trek too.
Did you guys know that Quatermass apparently had a reboot at the same time as Doctor Who in 2005?
Huh.
Which one is still around?
Yeah.
Let's see, is this?
But yeah, I remember the fact, especially like the Tom Baker era, the Armageddon factor, the idea was taken from a Star Trek episode.
Loosely.
Not the plot, the idea.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's a key thing, is that a lot of it is that ideas are there, but it's like the executions are entirely different, which is true of a lot of stuff when you really look at it.
Especially when you get to a lot of the long-running sci-fi things that ran at the same time, one thing would steal an idea from another, the second thing would steal part of an idea from the first and another part from the second. The third thing would come along and steal from all three of them at the same time. And generally a very evolving genre in that regard.
Well, Hollywood's having
While stealing everything.
an original idea these days, so
Well, that's because they've just been doing the stupid Heroes Quest for 20 years, 30 years. Oh, God.
but
So,
an
Unearthly
Unearthly Child.
Yes.
In my
So-
opinion, this is not the greatest of Doctor Who episodes. It is the one
I
that
think-
started them all, but it's very, if taken on its own, it's a very middle of the road episode.
The general, like, the fan wisdom on this is that the first episode is brilliant, the next three are shit. And
I wouldn't say shit, but
I
mediocre
wouldn't go
comes
that
to mind.
far, but I think there is a bit of truth in that following three episodes are not as good as the first one.
Yeah,
And the first one is brilliant.
Basically, the first one ends on a kind of cliffhanger that should really be followed by something better than what it was. Is probably the best way to sum it up,
I
in my
don't think
opinion.
so. I will actually defend this story in that I think it's one of the best possible first episodes for this because it's one of the few stories that makes traveling with the Doctor seem like something really, really terrifying and really horrifying. And what it does actually is it puts these characters through so much hell that anything after is going to be much, much better. And anything after is like, it's like in order to get to the good stuff, you have to go through this period of intense trauma and horrifying grittiness, and it's actually a really well thought out episode when you look at it because of there's a lot of parallels in Ian and Barbara in their struggle with the Doctor and their distrust of the Doctor with the tribes themselves, and with Colin, with the two leaders fighting against each other, being paralleled with Ian and the Doctor fighting, with the quest for fire being paralleled with the TARDIS, and with the fact that these four people have to build themselves as a community before they can actually work together and actually travel together.
I don't agree with you there, Flynn.
Why not?
Because I feel that this episode really could have been, if you took that first episode, stuck it before, say, the next serial, the Daleks, pretty much the same amount or even more hell is reflected in that episode.
That's true. Of course, it's interesting that the novelization and the following film adaptation, Doctor Who and the Daleks, did just that.
Well, yeah,
So
that's
the
because...
child affixed it onto the Daleks.
Well, the movie did it because they only had a finite amount of time, and they wanted to do the Dalek serial, and they had to introduce everybody. The first episode is a beautiful introductory episode.
Mm-hmm.
It is a great bit of explaining who Susan is, who Ian and Barbara is, and introducing us to the mystery that
It doesn't
Doctor.
explain who the Doctor is, but then again, the first several seasons don't exactly explain who the Doctor is.
I think
And
they're
that's
not
the
meant
main
to.
mystery of the show.
I introduce us to the mystery that is the Doctor.
Exactly.
What's really cool about the first episode, and this has been pointed out before, in that it feels totally fitting to Doctor Who, even 50 years later.
Oh yes,
It feels like, yes, this is the beginning of the show. It doesn't feel, it's like a lot of shows when you go back to the very first season, it feels like a totally different show. And by virtue, it is a whole different show because they haven't gone through the process of working it out and working out the kinks and all that. The very first episode of Doctor Who was interesting because you can watch it following Rose, and it would still make complete sense, and still you could believe that Rose followed from Unearthly Child.
not directly, but yes.
Not directly, yeah. And one of the things that's really interesting is the opening shot, where it's you segue from the credits, and you do a very long tracking shot that ends and focuses on a police box. Now, when this first aired, there's nothing remarkable about that shot. It's a police box. But because of how basically the camera's insistence on focusing on that police box tells us that it's iconic. And what makes this episode work so well is that years later, when the police box stopped being so ubiquitous and started being an active emblem for the show itself, this opening shot is like, yes, this is the show. This is the show itself, and it kind of works better with the years behind it.
I would also add that in that same tracking shot, you get a long shot of the doors leading into the junkyard-like area, and on those doors is written the word Freeman, or no, not Freeman, Foreman, which is what the Doctor and Susan use as a last name until the second episode.
Mm-hmm.
That's the lie. Susan technically never really gives up the Foreman name.
That's true.
She's always considered Susan Foreman up to the point she leaves.
Meanwhile, the first time the Doctor is called Dr. Foreman, he's like, "What? Doctor who?"
Yeah, that's not. And he actually says either in this episode or the next that it's not his name, just the Doctor.
I think it's very early in the next.
Yeah. And of course, another thing that's really interesting about this one too is the fact that one of the things, you know, it's a really, really well written episode, and like you get that montage of why Susan is so strange. What's really interesting is that one of the things she's apparently strange about is that she predicts the decimalization of British currency. Which ends up happening.
I love it when fiction actually predicts fact. I'm very fond of a role-playing game series called Cyberpunk. And as early as the late 80s, they were predicting the European Union and their version, the EEC, their currency was the Eurodollar, or euro, which of course came true.
And Ender's Game, that series predicted the blogosphere, because two of the central characters in that book rise to power using blogs, which was written in '85, so before that really started becoming popular. So yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing how much stuff like that predictions come true. I mean, Star Trek technology, a lot of what was, you know, supposed to be futuristic, awesome, that was just little bit stuff like data pads and stuff, all came true.
And some of the more big
thing
stuff
that's
is
most
coming
held
true
up
too.
is the flip phone.
And I mean, you know, like 2001, that so successfully predicted that we'd be on the moon by now, and you know, second planets and all that. So you know, it's really nice.
Actually, let's not go there, Flynn, because they had
2001 predicted actually that we'd have people in Jupiter by now.
Yeah, it's prediction false in 2001.
Right, that's the joke. I'm still waiting for my hover cars.
Just
anyway.
to interject a little bit, we've been very slowly going through bits about the plot, but we haven't actually summarized the episode. So first of all, for anybody who's...
I can basically sum up episode 2 through 4 in they get captured by cavemen. They escape from cavemen. They get captured by cavemen. They escape from cavemen.
For anyone who hasn't seen the first episode, go out and look it up. Unfortunately, you can't find the whole thing on in any free legal way that I can think of, but there are plenty of cheap enough ways to watch it. I'd still say still recommend it for the sake of history, but it's essentially Ian and Barbara, as the discussion has mentioned. Ian and Barbara are discussing Susan.
Actually, that's a
and
point.
Her both her impossible strengths and her unusual weaknesses as a student. They go off to check out what her home life is essentially like, to figure out what's going on with her homework, and find this police box in a junkyard where her address is supposed to be, guarded by an old man who does not want to tell them anything, who is, of course, the Doctor. Their conversation with him and
Potter's Lane, which will be, you know, reused repeatedly over the 26 season run of Doctor Who. It was visited twice or
No.
3 times more.
I think twice. Now, what's also interesting about this, for all that I said that it's an excellent introduction to the series, and you could watch it now and get a complete and still think this is a good introduction to the series, it's also a crap introduction to the First Doctor as a character. For the same reason, for all that I said that this doesn't have the problems of a first season episode, his character has all of the problems of a first season
Yeah,
character.
he's a real asshole.
His character, I mean, this episode is very faithful to what his character will be for the first, say, at least season or so.
I would say,
Really?
I would argue until the Daleks. I mean, not,
Until
sorry,
the Daleks, yeah. I would say
until
around the
Taz-
Daleks is when he starts to change a new leaf a little.
Only
Uh,
partially.
There's a point.
He's a very big asshole in the Daleks too.
I think
I
what
meant
sums
as-
it up to me is best. There's one article that I read basically saying that Dalek invasion of Earth is when he basically completes the transition, not 100%, but to become the Doctor as we know him. So that's
Yes,
basically
my
throughout the
argument
first
would
season.
My argument would be that he starts changing at the end of The Edge of Destruction and finishes changing by the Dalek invasion of Earth. By that point, he's as... I think what really defines the First Doctor as a character for me is that he's very, very giddy, very excited about everything he's exploring, and just has this real zest inside of him. And you don't see that really formed until Dalek invasion of Earth. I would argue
you
that's
see it
his
a little
turning
bit
point.
in the Daleks and such, but the TARDIS Eruditorium is the blog Flynn introduced us to, and I've been looking at it a little bit, and I can credit damn it, I just completely lost track of why I started that sentence. Oh yes, but basically, and the writer of that brought up a point which I can definitely agree with looking at the episodes, which is as the Doctor went on, he became known to viewers as someone who wants to go out, explore, and not be too concerned about the dangers of going forward and checking things out. But from the very first episode on, he's introduced as the protector of his granddaughter Susan, and because of those two natures being at odds, he really can't become that explorer until Dalek invasion of Earth, which is when Susan is removed rather ungracefully from the picture.
And that's a very good point, I think.
Also, the fact from a writing standpoint, when they originally were conceiving Doctor Who, the Doctor was not meant to be the central character. It was
an ensemble piece of the four
Ian,
people.
Barbara, and Susan. And the Doctor was, the instigator. He was the one that, took them on their trips. And he really was almost
He was the pilot.
a slightly softer version of Dr. Smith in the original first season of Lost in Space. Not that they were using that as a reference, in fact, quite the opposite. But he was frequently going to be as much of a foil as he was a help.
Here we go.
Most of those early story treatments treated him almost as a villainous character. And it was clear,
I would say villainous,
watching those first few episodes,
definitely selfish.
Yeah, selfish and paranoid a lot. He really the Ruditorium actually describes him as fearful in the first few episodes. I think that's a really great description, because you do get the sense that he is really afraid of them finding this out. He's really not.
He's on the run. He's on the run from a technologically advanced peoples that can go anytime and any place, and that's really forefront on his mind at the beginning of this.
I actually had to mention to Bill earlier in the week that the original writing notes for the Doctor did not include him as being an alien. I have somewhere copies of the original notes that I think Sidney Newman made for the character, or at least at the time of airing. And they mention the fact for the writers that the characterization of the Doctor is pretty much to be as mysterious as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Hints,
Yeah.
but no details.
Right. But yeah, and it's really. But what is interesting about the first Doctor, I think what a lot of people miss, because the first 2 seasons of Doctor Who are actually very character-driven. And the characters actually do grow and develop in a way that eventually gets abandoned in the series proper, and we don't see that kind of character development again until possibly Davison, but really McCoy with Ace. So the Doctor actually does develop. The Doctor does change in the next couple years, but because the show actually doesn't do that so often, I think there's a tendency to view as what he is here is what he is there, what he becomes is what he stays, and it's like, there's a real element to people watch this episode and think that's just who he is. He is this grumpy asshole character, and he never changes or progresses, and that's just not true, and it's a very unfair view of it.
He does stay a bit grumpy.
He does stay a bit grumpy, but it's not exactly.
I've argued this before.
It's not aimed at his companions after the first year or 2. He does remain a grumpy old man, but it's not. But his anger is not aimed at his companions after the first year or 2.
What I would argue, what I think the problem is that he has grumpiness to him, but too many people I think define him by that grumpiness, and I think I've never felt that he's any more grumpy than Pertwee or Tom Baker on a bad day, or Colin Baker for that matter. And Pertwee and Baker were never defined for their grumpiness. And so it was like, grumpy is a part of his character, but it's not his defining feature. And I think his youthful zest and his humor is actually clearer in his full established character than his grumpiness is. There's
the
more
humor is a part, but I don't think it's as big a part as you make it to be, just because it's kind of led into gradually, and it's just it's more used, if anything, to get you to side with him more than to be really a defining trait of him.
I don't see that at all, particularly when you watch him.
If anything, I would say there are probably particular serials and episodes that emphasize one trait more or another, but I would even put more for the Doctor being wrong and proven right later on, and being being proud as more defining traits of and things that are put forward. He definitely has a humorous side, but I wouldn't put that above any of those other things. Maybe on equal terms with those other things.
I don't know, because it's a matter of because I've been watching a lot of First Doctor lately, because I've been trying to catch up with the series up proper, and I watched the Romans, the Mythmakers, the Web Planet, and something else, and all of those. Well, Romans and Mythmakers, those are comedies, and so they're written a specific way.
Mm-hmm.
But all 3 of those stories have his excitement and his curiosity as the forefront of his character, rather than his grumpiness or his pride. Particularly the Web Planet.
But really, those same traits are indicative of all the Doctors, especially the curiosity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I mean,
so, having it stand out for the First Doctor, not really.
I don't know. I would really
argue he definitely has the curiosity, but
no, the curiosity was there from very much the Daleks.
For example, in the Daleks, pretty much every version of the Doctor would have wanted to go explore the planet, but how many of them would have
pulled out something important for the TARDIS to make them do it?
That's the first season. That's the first season Doctor.
No, but
any first season character, he's not going to be.
But what I'm saying is that curiosity's still there.
Yeah.
He wants to explore the city. The others don't.
Mm-hmm.
the other doctors would find a way, but not all of them would say pull out a part of the TARDIS that's kind of important.
But that little aspect right there, I firmly believe if the Daleks was written for the third season, for a third season Doctor, he wouldn't have done that. I don't think that's a character trait we can define to the first Doctor, more the Doctor before he becomes the Doctor as we know him.
No, if it had been written for a later Doctor Who, he wouldn't have lied to his companions about it. That accident would have actually happened.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because how many times has the TARDIS broke? I mean, it's a Doctor Who trope in itself.
Yeah, the TARDIS broke down.
The TARDIS breaks down something.
The TARDIS
Hell,
breaks and
Vengeance of Pharaoh, that was the entire instigator of the plot.
The TARDIS breaks down what? Between the first and second episode, when he gets out of the TARDIS, he's like, why is it still a police box?
Mm-hmm.
So it's already starting to malfunction.
Or my favorite in Edge of Destruction, when a broken spring causes the whole world to go insane.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I actually went on Netflix here really quick to because you're talking about trying to find this first episode. I'm like, you know what? Netflix has Classic Who. Let me have a look here. First season, Classic Doctor Who, 1964, and their first and only story for the first season is the Aztecs.
Mm-hmm.
They only have one story from each Doctor.
No,
they
have
about one story for each
they have
season.
They have a few for Tom Baker.
They have a lot for Baker, a few for Pertwee, 2 for Davison, and yeah, that's about it. And then
it's literally one story a
except
season.
for Colin Baker, which they don't have any.
And of course, Ex-Lieutenant Smith, where they have everything excluding the last season.
Mm-hmm.
And except for the season 4.5 specials. Which
they still have they have End of Time and Waters of Mars. Maybe they also have the Next Doctor, I think, but they don't.
No, they have them all. I saw them last time I was in there.
But they don't. Okay.
But yeah,
before they were all rental only.
Yeah, now they're all part of series 4.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, just the Netflix grouping of Classic Who in general is very disappointing.
Yeah, for me in particular. Now I think you can get a lot of them on DVD.
Yeah, you can, which is more reason why Netflix should have more, but for some reason it doesn't.
Well, and the first episode's actually very easy to get a hold of because that box set that it's a part of is still sold in most retail stores that carry Doctor Who DVDs. I know
that's Unearthly Child, the Daleks, Edge of Destruction, all in one collection, isn't it?
Plus the pilot episode. Yes.
Plus the pilot episode.
Yes. And I bought that a while ago for like $30.
Yeah, I own that one too.
Mm-hmm.
I've yet to see that box set. I don't think Best Buys are big enough for that.
Mm-mm. Well, no, actually, they should stock some Doctor Who DVDs.
Oh, I'm sure they do, but they don't have that particular one. I've looked at
might
Best
not,
Buys and Barnes and Noble and everything else.
They used to have it at Best Buy, Matt. I got mine at Best Buy.
Sure. It's there when I'm not looking.
I don't think Fry's Electronics actually extends beyond Arizona. I'm not sure how local it is. But that's where I always
Wisconsin.
get my Doctor Who DVDs.
Ooh, you're right. I do take it back. They go from the Next Doctor to the Waters of Mars and then End of Time. They're missing the desert one.
Yeah. That's what I thought. But really, when it comes down to it, if you're going to miss a special, you might as well miss that one.
Yeah,
True.
That one technically really didn't do anything.
You could miss that one. You could technically miss the Next Doctor. But you really don't want to miss Waters of Mars.
Yeah, Waters of Mars is actually pretty good. I was rewatching that a while ago, and I was like, yeah, that's good.
Oh, I wouldn't miss the Next Doctor because it's decent, but they're standalone as opposed to Water of Mars, which is a lead-in.
Yeah.
Right.
Of course, you could probably watch End of Time without needing Waters of Mars beforehand.
Although, if you think about it, it was the desert one where he gets his prophecy that he's going to die.
He gets the prophecy, like... Oh, right, you're right. I forgot that he only gets it there. That's right. Huh.
So, they're missing that part. Interesting. You could can the Next Doctor and gone with that one. Ah, well. They probably wouldn't want to can it because it was a Christmas special.
Yeah.
Back to An Unearthly Child.
Yes.
Holy smokes. Yeah, I just looked up the DVD pack. With all 4 stories, it's $88 used.
Really?
Ooh.
Wait, where do you live?
Wisconsin.
Well, that's weird.
I got
I got it for
mine
30
for
bucks.
I think
Yeah, Amazon.com is selling it for $88 used. And an Unearthly Child by itself is selling for about $30 to $40.
yeah,
That
it's
shouldn't be right.
no that box set around here is no longer in circulation / print.
Oh, that sucks.
Yeah, I'm pretty
Yeah,
sure that
it's still in
stopped printing
circulation
up
where I
here at
live.
least for a while.
So I know it was at my local Barnes and Nobles, as well as Prize Electronics, where I usually get all my stuff.
Fry's is not available around here. That's a West
Yeah,
Coast thing.
that was what I thought. Like I'm pretty sure it's not local to Arizona, but it's like
All we have is
only
Best Buy. We don't even have Circuit City anymore because that went out of business. Comp USA went out of business, so we don't have that. So pretty much Barnes and
Buy.
Noble
And Barnes
or
and Noble.
Best Buy.
Yeah.
Even the Borders is gone now. So
Yeah, even Borders
Wow,
is
you're
gone.
right. I was not expecting that. Huh.
Yeah, it is expensive.
It must have gone out of print a while ago.
If
But
you're still
only-
seeing it in stores for $30, dude, grab us a couple copies. We'll give you money.
All right.
no, I got my copy. You just.
I need a copy. I need a copy. If you can find that 4 story set for $30, mail it to me. I'll pay for
Or
it.
at least until they
All right.
come out with the
That was
special
actually-
editions of
good.
those episodes.
Shut up and take my money.
I know. I apparently have to rebuy the entire Key to Time series
Oh.
because they were re-released in special edition.
Oh. Damn you, special
It's
edition.
like $70, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, there's special edition. $69 though.
What?
On the episode itself, is it just me, or is Unearthly Child probably the smartest that we see Ian?
Oh, he's
Yeah.
got his bright points.
I mean, I
He
haven't
just
seen
doesn't have
every
them.
serial that he's in, but he
No,
mostly
he
seems
has
to
his
be
high
the
points.
one around to lose arguments with the doctor.
90% of the time, he is more of the physical type.
Yeah, he's
But
not always
what
the
is-
brains, but he has his moments.
He has his moments. He is the science teacher.
And he's in the middle of a science fiction world which will constantly prove his brain wrong.
Oh,
Oh,
does
we
it think
haven't
about?
quite gotten the doctor to the point where he's pulling off the impossible yet. This was early edutainment. Was the concept here? They wanted it to be entertaining and educational, which is why they decided.
Which is why 100,000 BC was the first actual serial of the show.
Oh yeah, they didn't want to run the Daleks actually.
Well, actually, what happened was that Weber was writing a story called The Giants, which basically was turned into, or basically the same plot as the later Planet of the Giants, where they are miniaturized and, in this world of giant animals and all that. But Sidney Newman didn't like it, and so he scrapped the concept, and then this story, which was already being written, was bumped up to become the first one, and so they rewrote the first episode so that it became an introduction episode.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
it
have to
actually
wonder if
wasn't
Gulliver's
meant to
Travels
be
was
the first
already in the public domain at that point.
They also did not want to use the Daleks because
They
the
thought they
script
looked-
editor
Hmm?
insisted that there not be any bug-eyed monsters.
Right.
And they thought that they looked silly, but they were already in production, and they're kind of
And that
like,
was
well,
the only
we can't really pull
manuscript
out.
that was currently available. So it was either
Yeah,
run.
why was it? There was what?
games.
The Daleks was one of like 4 scripts that they had, but for some reason it was the only usable one. Does anybody know any of the details behind that?
All the other ones had been sent back for rewrites.
Okay.
And that one was ready for production, so they kind of shrugged and went, well, it's the only thing we got.
Yeah, the part of the problem for some of the others was the budget estimates were too high.
And of course, the Daleks went from there to become more popular than the show itself
Yeah.
here.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
which-
largely like the longevity of the show is. I mean, the success of the show initially is probably because of the Daleks. Like, we probably would not have the show today if it weren't for the Daleks.
Correct. They were so popular that Terry Nation at one point had told the BBC they couldn't use the Daleks anymore, and he was trying to ship a Dalek Empire series.
Yep, that's right.
I think over here in the US, where he quickly discovered that the Dalek mania that they were experiencing in England was currently restricted to England.
To which he came over here and found out a lot of people going, "What's a Dalek?"
Yeah, where he, showed this to U.S. executives, and they did the 1960s equivalent of "lol, what?"
What the hell's that?
Yeah. You want us to run series about a bunch of tin cans? Don't call us, we'll call you.
Which is also what they told George Lucas for a very long time, too. But he eventually found
Now,
people crazy
imagine
enough to put
how
money
different
into it.
Doctor Who would be if they actually, if Terry Nation had gotten a Dalek Empire series domestically. It probably would have bombed, but it would have permanently severed the Daleks from Doctor Who. So he never would have come back and wrote Genesis.
Possibly.
Maybe it bombed so hard that he had no choice but to come back to Britain and go,
That-
"Oh, you
Or,
people
I mean,
love
there's
me."
a lot of possibilities. Another one is that if it had gone badly, he might have lost the rights or something like that might have happened, and they might have been bought up by another company or something. There's a lot of different possibilities. There's a lot of different what ifs.
I'm just saying the fact that if he had gotten it pushed, it would have the rights for Daleks would have been held by CBS or NBC or ABC. Really, the only three options at the time.
Mm.
And that would have kept the BBC from using them. So while he might have come back and done Genesis of the Daleks, it wouldn't have been Genesis of the Daleks. It would have been
Genesis of the new robotic
something
Of the board.
things.
Genesis of the board.
Or it would have been Genesis of the Daleks without the Doctor.
If the series had gone on and not bombed.
Right.
That was
Actually, now I want to see an alternate history of Doctor Who in which Genesis of the Daleks is Genesis of the Boards from Keys of Marinus.
I would rather actually see Genesis of the Cybermen, but maybe that's just me.
That's
called the Audio Adventure Spare Parts, Matt.
Or what was the name of those Dalek wannabes in the comics that eventually were replaced when the comics got the right to use Daleks?
I have no clue.
The comics actually had the rights to use the Daleks for quite a while. I don't know.
There's a lot of knockoff Daleks in the show itself, like the Chumblies and the Crotons were both trying to capitalize on the and the Quark.
Those were, I think, came out during the era where they couldn't.
But the ones I'm thinking of was basically it was a whatever running Doctor Who affiliated comic was basically everything that they could legally do related to Daleks without actually having gotten the rights to the Daleks yet. So they were like conical. The name of the planet was different, but it was still basically Skaro. They acted like Daleks, and then eventually they got the rights to Daleks. Immediately, they had the Daleks come in and wipe out that species and take over the comic. I think they changed it. I think they changed the name of the comic when they got the Daleks as well. Let's see if I can find what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I'm looking, but
the comic book has its own craziness. What can we say?
That's the thing. I never look at the comic books and take them seriously because they just get too far out there.
There's a
some
couple
good
of
stuff
them.
Especially the ones,
As always.
the ones from the 60s and 70s. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Of course,
60s,
there were
70s
some
were...
comics written by Alan Moore and Grant Morrison, so that's interesting.
Yeah, some of the 60s and 70s ones were kind of out there. I mean, look at what we had for comic books here. I think the Silver Age at that point just ended.
The 60s and 70s, no, the Silver Age was going pretty strong through most of that.
It started to die off in the 70s when they started getting serious again. Which was right around the 70s.
There we go. The Trods, that's what I'm thinking of.
The Trodos.
It says Trot. It says
The Trodos ambush.
okay. And Wikipedia is calling them the Trods, but saying the Trodos ambush. So I don't know if it was both or if it's just a typo.
Maybe the planet itself was Trodos.
So are we done talking about an Unearthly Child?
Oh yeah, the Daleks began making appearances starting in the Trodos ambush.
Where our wandering minds go. So,
Where they massacred the Trods.
Well, the thing is, I mean, other than the first actual episode, I don't have much to say about the remaining three.
Well, I think the only thing I would have to add is that...
What I found out was apparently my copy, for some reason, only has one episode of the 100,000 BC serial, so I basically have the first 2 episodes, and then it cuts on to the Daleks after that.
Huh. Interesting. Yeah, the only real thing I have to say, because this is a very basic story.
Yes, it is.
One thing I would have to say that it is interesting, for all that the story is very thin and there's not a lot going on, it is very well thought out. Like, there are a lot of parallels and a lot of recursions through it that are very, maybe not interesting, but you can tell time and thought and effort was put into this, which makes it a little interesting. Also, that the climax, it's one of the few stories where every companion has a definite part to play in the climax.
Well,
a separate role
it was good at that, where they're still trying to establish these characters.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and as the Oratorium likes to point out, it's the serial where the Doctor, purely for the sake of convenience, was willing to brain a guy with a stone in order to get away and get going where he needed to.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, and actually this is also something, is that this story was, okay, when John Nathan Turner had taken over the program and Peter Davison was being brought on as the Doctor, there was a huge fear that people would leave because Tom Baker wasn't on the program anymore, which was why they made his last season much less comedic, made him a much smaller part of the show, and really tried to de-emphasize his role in the show. Another thing he tried to do, but another thing he tried to do to try to keep people interested in the show after he's left is he did the 5 Faces of Doctor Who, which were a series of repeats of classic Who episodes before Peter Davison took on. And what's interesting about these is that you can definitely see them as forming the opinions of later fandoms, particularly that the episode chosen for the first Doctor was An Unearthly Child. And given that you didn't really video was just breaking out at this point, you didn't see a lot of these old classic episodes. So for about a decade, most kids had in their mind the image of the first Doctor being the one that was about to bash in a caveman's head. So it's no surprise that the idea of the first Doctor being grumpy and unlikable got around to being fan wisdom.
There's also the fact that he had the tendency to randomly threaten to drop Ian and Barbara off wherever they happened to be, whether it was around breathable air or not. So that did help form some people's opinions of him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that happened a lot for the first season too.
Until about Marco Polo, I think. Cause eventually Barbara gives him a really yells him out, and he has to apologize to her at the end.
Mm-hmm. Chews him up and down.
Mm-hmm. Which is, yeah, I love that episode, Edge of Destruction. Like, that's a great episode. Not extremely popular for some reason, but I just love it.
Now
it's not very popular because most of the video's gone
around here because it was
it exists.
Parts. And it was following the 7-part Daleks.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, the unsteadiness of the amount of episodes for Doctor Who format back there used to drive me nuts in the 80s. Taping these off a late-night public television.
Mm-hmm. Of course, and a lot of that was that, and I was actually reading up on it, they were discussing different formats. Initially, it was going to be, every serial was going to be 7 or 8 parts, if I remember right. And eventually they decided, no, some of them should be 4 parts, and some of them should be 6, and all that.
Mm-hmm. But it used to drive me absolutely insane, because I would set my VCR to tape for 2 hours.
Uh-huh.
And then they'd have one of those really long serials on,
Yeah.
and I would miss the last end of it, and it's just like, no.
Yeah, it was interesting that there really aren't a lot of serials that are beyond 6 parts though. Because offhand, I know there's two. Is there 3 stories? 2 or 3? 2, 3 in season 7. I think it's 3 7 parts in season 7. Invasion, which is 8 parts. War Games is 10 parts. Um, if you count Dalek Invasion Earth as one, I mean, Dalek's Master Plan as one story, which I don't. That's 12 parts.
It is counted as one story.
Yeah, but it's like that's one where it's officially counted as one story. It's more valuable to think of it as multiple stories because it's multiple writers, multiple production codes, and it's really.
I'm only seeing one production code.
Yeah,
for
there's
two
only
writers.
one production code
Sir?
for it.
Is there?
Unless you're counting Mission to the Unknown as part of Dalek's Master Plan.
Which
Perhaps,
is
I don't know. Let me see.
AKA Dalek Cutaway. I like.
How I learned to stop worrying and love the Daleks.
You're right. I don't know why I thought it was multiple production codes.
Nope, there's only one production code for
Yep.
that. Can't remember if there was multiple production codes for the what was it, the 23rd season?
Trial of a Time Lord? Yes, there are. There are multiple production codes.
And that
Right, so
they
Trial of a
treat that as
Time
one
Lord would be
ginormous
a
episode too.
season
But
plot,
it's
not a
so
single
not one
serial,
story.
right?
Like, treating it as one story is silly. Like, I'm just gonna say that. It's stupid to think of Trial of a Time Lord as a 14-part story. Like, there's no point to that.
Yeah, I don't agree with it myself.
Way too long.
Like, the minimum amount of stories you could say it as is 3, because there's 3 production codes. But the last
4
one,
production codes.
no, it's 3. Because the last, it's Terror of the Vervoids
Oh,
and
never mind,
Ultimate
never mind.
Foe. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
But yeah. Anyway, we didn't discuss that. Should Unearthly Child 100 BC be looked at as one singular 4-part story, or one episode story and
As a
one 3-part
one-parter
story?
followed by a series.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good question.
They do lend into each other very well, but that's usually what they did anyways between stories, was have a...
I mean, with only minor rewriting, you could put an Unearthly Child in front of the Daleks and not have much issue.
Yeah, I basically see it as a pilot.
Conversely, you could also put 100,000 BC after any other serial with minor rewrites, and it would be fine.
Right. Basically, I see it as a pilot followed by the first short.
The first 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Is another way to look at it too.
Pretty much, actually.
Of course, back in the day, of course, what's interesting to note is that these episodes were all individually titled until I think the Smugglers, which is when they started doing part 1, part 2, part 3, etc.
That's because they realized they were running out of names.
Yeah. But it's interesting, though, that...
We get like 2 more seasons before we're going to have to start recycling names.
Yeah. But it's interesting, though, if you look at it as... and actually, they already started recycling names, didn't they? Because doesn't the Rescue recycle a name from the Daleks?
Yes, it's an episode name and then a serial name later.
Oh, never mind. Rescue is 2 different names. Rescue is just the new name.
Yeah, I knew it caused problems later on because there was the episode The Ark, and then there was The Ark in Space.
Mm-hmm.
Although it's clear that they didn't name all of the serials straight off the bat, because if you look at, for example, the Wikipedia list, some of the serials have 3 different names. It's just the commonly accepted one is the one that it mainly goes by.
Yeah, that's generally how it happened, and that's eventually, I think, why they decided to go, yeah.
Or maybe by generally accepted, that's probably what they put on the DVD.
Mm-hmm.
No.
Yeah.
Oh, before that, it was what they put on the actual Target books, usually.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that makes sense.
Well, even then, though, some of the names... well, actually, never mind. Target books weren't always accurate.
An Unearthly Child was a matter of contention because for a long time, the BBC was absolutely adamant that was not the name of the serial, preferring to use the 100,000 BC or the Tribe of Gum.
Yeah. And Shannon Sullivan, which is where I get most of my information regarding the series, they list it as 100,000 BC.
But eventually, when the VHS came out, it was called An Unearthly Child, the same as the Target book. And mind you, yeah, he's right. Some of the Target books do have different names. The Target books especially tended to do Doctor Who and the...
Yeah, or like Doctor Who and the Auton Invasion instead of Spearhead from Space. Doctor Who and the Zarbi instead of the Web Planet.
Eventually, the second or third printings changed that. Because I know mine actually says the Web Planet on it. Or are you thinking of the pre-Target books, the old black covers?
I'm thinking of the Target books themselves. Okay. But yeah, so is that all we have to say about Unearthly Child?
Well,
it's a very short story, and there's and despite how long they managed to make it, there's really not that much plot.
Yeah.
Lots of caveman groaning and waving around of bones.
As Matt said, it's... Oh, we've escaped. Oh, now we're captured.
Actually, I believe that was Flynn who said that.
Oh, now we're captured.
Yeah, I said that.
Yeah, escape, captured, escape, captured, escape again. And flee.
What always strikes me about this episode, and this is a personal standpoint, what always struck me about it is that when I began... My introduction to the series was Christopher Eccleston. I started watching the episodes on Netflix. Somewhere around season 2 or 3, I decided, oh, hey, I wonder what the old series are like. The old series is like. So I watched the Rivals Operation, which I found just a little... Initially, I found a little slow, and it's like, oh, okay, this is fine. Then I went and torrented the first set of Doctor Who episodes. I torrented... Unearthly Child, The Daleks, and Edge of Destruction. And I watched the first episode. I didn't find it boring, and I immediately liked the first Doctor as a character. I have no idea why. Because...
We're trying to chalk it up to insanity on your part, Flynn.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know why.
Yeah, you're really not supposed to like him in those stories, so...
See, and perhaps what it was... This is the best, having been accustomed to the Doctor as a humorous character, as a funny character, then watching him in the very first episode, he actually gets a lot of really, really good barbs in. Like, there's actually quite a couple really funny lines that he gets. That if you look at him in the context of the original, they're very bitchy. They're very mean. But if you approach them with the knowledge that he will become funnier later on, they're actually kind of funny. I don't know.
Actually, my personal history of first seeing this, I actually saw, I believe, the entire Christopher Eccleston run, and then just before I saw season 2, I'm like, I wonder what Classic Who was like, and I actually started downloading one Doctor at a time at that point, and I did see the first one first, because you're supposed to start at the beginning if you're going to watch this old stuff, and Unearthly Child, I'm like, oh, that was kind of interesting. Then the caveman, wow, this is kind of slow, isn't it? Daleks.
I'm sure I thought it was a little slow, but it's like, I liked it in the same sense. Actually, you know what? I grew up on 60s and 70s television, and I think I'm a little more accustomed to the pacing. And so it's like, I still think it's a little slow. But I'm more accustomed to it than someone who is more prone to more recent television.
Someone who grew up on 90s Saturday morning ADD cartoons.
Yeah, I mean, my childhood was like Gilligan's Island and Mary Tyler Moore, you know?
Oh, I saw plenty of those
Gilligan's
myself.
Island. Don't talk to me about Gilligan's Island.
Little buddy.
You know, when you're in 4th grade, it's the greatest shit ever.
Oh, I know. I liked it even back when I started college.
I I mean, I watched it recently and actually found out it held up. So, I mean, it's a goofy show, but it holds up well if you just want a
I
goofy
think my only
show.
problem if I watched it now would be I wouldn't, especially with the television I've been watching now, I wouldn't get over the fact that they couldn't just murder the freaking idiot who keeps trapping them on the island so that they could escape on their own.
That wouldn't make for a very funny show.
No.
It wouldn't, but I would just
It'd make
sit
a
over there like, why
fantastically
haven't
dark
you
show,
choked him in
though.
his sleep
Well,
yet?
you know, like I said, I liked it at the beginning of when I started college, but then again, I was really fond of Jim Backus at the time. Mostly because I like to do imitations of him, which I've lost the ability to do.
Oh, Jim Backus. Yes.
Not close, no. It was actually closer to Bing Crosby. Anyway. Yeah, when I watched this, it was when WHA, our local PBS station, was showing the serials once a week. So they would get through whatever the latest Doctor was, which was usually going to be the 6th or 7th by the time I started watching, and then would go back and start again at the 1st. So you can imagine going from 80s Doctor Who abruptly to this.
Yeah. And I mean, today I have a problem getting through. I usually do a first Doctor episode in 2 sittings. Like even something like The Romans, which is very funny and very upbeat and very well paced. It still takes me just a little bit while. Or Web Planet took me 5 sittings, I think.
Yeah,
that one's also a bit slow.
yeah. I had a large problem trying to watch that particular episode, but this one as well. My problem is, of course, that when these were on was originally Sunday night, right before PBS shut down for the evening. So we're talking like midnight. I'm 80s, so I'm about 10, 12, 14. You can imagine that if the pacing of the episode was particularly slow, I had a hard time staying awake.
Yeah.
And we didn't get episode breaks back then. This was back when Lionheart did the American distribution. And they hacked the repeat off the beginning of the 2nd episode and just spliced it directly onto the tail end of that episode. So we had one long episode.
Yeah.
So
and that's always that's a bad way of watching those old episodes. Like, they're really not meant to be watched that way.
Actually, that's how I used to watch them.
The episode became a movie.
Right. I mean, like, that's how we usually watch them now. That's the typical way of watching them, but they come off. I mean, if you're not making mental allowances, like in your head, if you're not going, all right, this is a little slow, but I'm watching it differently than it's meant to be watched. If you're not doing that, they come off horribly.
Well, mind you, I was 10.
Yeah.
I didn't know they were meant to be seen any other way.
Right.
And the thing is, I had a hard time watching this episode because it was largely them sitting around a cave.
Right.
I have this issue with modern productions. I, for instance, hate a good chunk of the 7th, both parts of the Harry Potter movie, because it's mostly Harry and Hermione sitting around in the woods. It's like, no, does not good entertainment make?
I believe I first saw Classic Who when I was 20.
So
I don't. Well, I mean,
God, that was 7 years
the argument
ago.
there, though, would be that usually situations like that are where you develop your characters and where you try to, where the interest is garnered out of them growing, them developing, or using that time to work with them, and that's why.
If your dialogue's not really good, you're still going to have trouble holding people's attention.
Well, that's because people are stupid. But anyway.
And to be honest, the next week when they showed the next serial, Dalek, I didn't have that problem so much with the exception of I think it's part 6.
Yeah, I wouldn't defend.
Yeah, I think there was like maybe one small subpart.
Caves. I wouldn't defend 100 BC on that count. 100,000 BC on this count. I would not say they use their time well to develop characters. For the most part, they don't.
There was a lot of
later in the show they do, but not in this particular episode.
Yeah, it largely just kind of you hit a whole level of I've stopped caring.
Actually,
I wouldn't go that far, but I mean, like I said, there is thought and there is purpose behind a lot of it, but it is still a series of fictitious.
I can watch it now, but my 10 to 12-year-old self hit a level of I'm not caring.
Oh yeah.
Actually, I think it was Flynn. You shared a video of a guy that was talking about the caveman episodes?
Did I?
I think you did. I think you were intending to share the Unearthly Child one, but you shared the caveman ones instead. And it's like a guy who does some entire story arcs, apparently. But essentially, he starts this one off, and after they land, and the landing scene for the caveman stuff is awesome because you can get some good lines from Hartnell about going out and actually seeing new things you've never seen before. And then take like almost 5 minutes to literally step outside. But then you suddenly page away and you see these really boring cavemen just acting like spazzes in a cave, and it's like, the hell?
Although that whole thing about taking 5 minutes to go outside is a great harken to the end of the episode where they go out a little more rushed, and then the second they leave, that radiation dial goes sliding up near the end.
Mm-hmm.
By the way,
I do like how they take forever. The doctor's taking his sweet time to leave. He's like, no, we're not going till I know it's safe. Yada yada. And he's like, okay, I'm ready to go. I do not have time to sit and have a conversation for 5 more seconds. I'm out the door. And I forget who it was. Probably Ian was arguing about something. They're just like, what? And he just like walks out.
But yeah, once they get into the caves, it really bores me because a lot of the time is actually spent dealing with the tribe themselves, and I didn't find the tribe to be that interesting. Mostly because they spent most of the time talking in broken speech.
And not even good broken speech either.
Yeah, it's not a great way to establish,
Basically, they probably could have just cut an episode out and put whatever plot points from that. I mean, I would leave Unearthly Child and Cave of Skulls alone, and then probably, I think, could probably just combine Forest of Fear and the Firemaker, make a little bit of a faster pace.
But of course,
thing, or I'm sure there's things that can be cut.
But back then, when you had to get 13 episodes out, you really didn't have that option to cut to do it. They actually did do that for a later story, though. The Planet of Giants was originally 4 parts, but I think it was Cindy Newman who suggested they cut the last 2 episodes and meld them into a single episode.
I think that's where we wound up with the Edge of Destruction, wasn't it? They needed something to fill those gaps.
Yeah, they needed something to fill out the 13 episodes.
Mm-hmm. And, well, they've got a TARDIS set, so why not use it?
Yeah, that was the thing. They had to do it on virtually no budget, too.
So they only did the principal cast and TARDIS.
Which is no extras, no additional sets, no additional costumes.
And I think that one, too, I only saw stills of, but it actually kept my interest, so...
Edge of Destruction is actually a good episode. That good parts of it. I like it.
Yeah.
I like it a lot,
Very
too.
good suspense.
Yeah.
And I mean, it is David Whitaker, who's a very good writer. And the character work in there is very good, and there's a lot of really, really great moments.
There's actually a lot of character development over Edge of Destruction.
Yeah. And my favorite moment is the one where Barbara chews out the doctor. I mentioned that before. The animation sequence is really nice. The more surreal aspects of it are really nice. Caroline Ford gets some of her best work done in that episode alone. It's really, really a nice episode.
Nice pair of episodes, yeah.
It'd be a nice companion piece if they released it along with, what's the name of that episode? The Doctor's Wife?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. because both do kind of deal with the idea. Obviously, Edge of Destruction less so, but it is the precursor to the notion that the TARDIS is fully alive.
Right. Well, that was part of the thing. They're basically like, the TARDIS is warning them. He's like, no, that's not possible. It's just a machine.
Yeah. And it's also, I think, discounting Amy's choice, because I don't think it counts. It's the only bottle episode that the show has done. Besides, maybe Midnight. Midnight's a bottle episode. I forgot that. Midnight and Edge of Destruction are the only bottle episodes the show's ever done.
I'm thinking there's one other, but it's not coming to mind.
Right.
I don't know. There's something that's ringing in there that they did another one somewhere.
Didn't they do one with Centaurans, kind of, sort of?
That wasn't a bottle episode, though. That was a 6-part serial, 2 of which were set almost entirely within the TARDIS. But it breaks a lot of rules for being a bottle episode.
Okay. I just remember that one taking a lot of time in the TARDIS, which they normally didn't do at the time.
Well,
And I think a lot of it was them actually getting lost.
Yeah, but the issue is that the budget was really, 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 horribly bad at that point. It was one of the worst budgets the show ever had, and so basically they had to film in an old deserted hospital, and say that those were the corridors of the TARDIS. Unfortunately, it's also very clearly an old deserted hospital, so it's it doesn't get away with it. Yeah,
at the same time, it's also the first time we got to see the pool, too.
Yeah.
I remember the pool. I'm
glad
they brought back the pool.
I think there might have been a few, or 1 or 2 of the Third Doctor episodes that might have been essentially bottle episodes, because it was mostly Unit HQ. But it might have broken it because there might have been some quarry scenes.
Yeah.
And of course, you're not counting. You wouldn't be counting short specials like Space and Time, Time Crash.
No, we're not talking. We're talking full episodes.
Full-length episodes. Yeah.
Because obviously, all of those
to make bottle episodes was part of the reasoning behind doing the whole Exile to Earth bit.
I'm trying to remember how much scenery there was in 42. I can never remember the details for that episode.
42, there's at least an entire extra ship, so that was a new set.
Yeah, and they break.
It was an extremely forgettable episode for me. I just can, no matter how much I try to remember, I never can.
The arc is almost a bottle episode.
It's my absolute least favorite episode, 42. I hate that episode with a passion. Oh, cool.
The arc, and actually both the arc and the arc in space are pretty much bottle episodes.
Yeah, arc in space, kind of. I can see that. Except that you have an additional, I think. Hold on, I actually need to double check this before I say it. But if I'm right, bottle episodes are supposed to, as few non-regular cast members. So really, I think it's cheating to count an episode that has that large cast in it. So yeah.
But yeah, Unearthly Child.
I think we're pretty much done, right? So we can pretty much end now.
Yeah, well, it's been about an hour and a half, so I think it's about time for ratings.
Yeah, I think we can. Any final considerations, thoughts? I would just say definitely Unearthly Child and the first 10 minutes of the following episode are, pretty iconic. The rest, I could pretty much take or leave.
Yeah. I could take and leave some. I could take some bits, but leave a lot of others. Caveman spazzing out with bones. Yay.
I mean, I like it for all of its flaws. I do enjoy it. I mean, I wouldn't. I once did a Doctor Who marathon, and I did it. We watched Unearthly Child, then we watched the Aztecs, because that's just I don't I'm not going to show it to other people. I'm not going to sit them in front of an Unearthly Child and go, yes, this is great television. And I'm not going to watch all that off of myself. The first episode, I think 5 out of 5, absolutely excellent, wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
The next,
Yeah, not
yeah,
a lot
2 out of 5.
happens, but not a lot happens, but it's a really good pilot. A really good pilot.
Oh yeah, excellent.
terms
And
of
it sets up a
setting
lot of really good ideas.
As
Yeah.
far as television pilots
It's
in
a good
general,
hook to get you interested.
as far as good television pilots in general, breaking out of even just drama or anything like that, it's probably one of the best, along with the pilot to Cheers and the pilot to, there's another one I'm thinking of that's very, very good. I forgot what it was. Oh well. As one of the best. One of the absolute best.
I'm quite partial to the original pilot to Lost in Space myself.
I have a soft spot for Where No Man Has Gone Before.
I don't like that one as much. I mean, I like the episode, but I don't like it as much as a pilot because it really doesn't introduce you to the characters properly. It just assumes they're there.
Well, yeah. I mean, I don't know. Well, the difficulty is that they're not versions of the characters that they're pre-versions of the characters, and they introduce those characters very well, but they're not the characters we know anymore.
It's not just that, but it's like we join your heroes already in progress.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of doing like Doctor Who, where we show you the beginning.
And I don't think the beginning is necessary for a pilot. I think pilots can get away with, and here we are here.
Yeah, but I think what hurts the first season of Star Trek a little bit is that it's trying to really the cast isn't quite established. You have Kirk and Spock are always there, but otherwise it's just kind of depended on who showed up that was interested in any given script, and then they would
perfectly honest,
adjust it to that.
I think, to be perfectly honest, I've never much liked the first season because I've always felt Star Trek is at its best when it's being camp. Like, and
I very
this
disagree.
is an unpopular viewpoint.
This is not a Star Trek podcast, so I will not get into it. But we could spend an hour arguing on that.
I've always felt, in general, not every time, in general, Star Trek works. I mean, not always. Star Trek, I still think like Wrath of Khan is the best Star Trek piece of media that's been produced so far.
Mm-hmm.
But
oh God, yeah, okay, we will agree on that.
In general, it's easier to make a good Star Trek when you're being a little bit loose with, when you're being a little bit more
nuclear vessels and row your boat.
That's Voyage Home, not Wrath of Khan.
When he's saying a little bit loose, that's where I was at. Nuclear vessels.
I love nuclear vessels.
That's a good place. I would.
Row your boat is not a good place.
I like that scene.
But
which one is that's Star Trek 5, isn't it? Well,
which I will state, even though this is the Doctor Who state, I will state I will only accept Star Trek 5 as being part of the Star Trek series, and the fact that it's a fevered dream while Kirk is lying in sickbay after falling off that freaking rock.
I should emphasize, the camp has to be done well. Star Trek 5 is just not good.
Because it's there. What kind of excuse is that?
If the camp was serious, it's still not good.
No, if I go for my favorite classic Star Trek episode, it's Balance of Terror.
That's a really good one. That's a really good one. I've always been partial to
Guardian on the Edge itself.
Oh, I don't like that one as much because of the morals. Because it's...
Yeah, that's a bit heavy-handed for my tastes.
It's also the morals are really, not offensive, but they basically say pacifism is terrible. Or pacifism will lead you to Nazism. And
I basically saw was don't go back in time and change things because you don't know what the effect is going to be. It'll look good, but actually fuck up everything.
But it's deliberately saying... I mean, that's obviously the point, but it's deliberately saying in that... when you depict a time period like World War II, you are inevitably going to be making a political message about it. And their political message is pacifism is a mistake.
I don't think even that was intentional. I mean, I would just say at that point in time, I mean, I don't think that was. I think that was something that was part of it. I don't think that was the main point of it, but
It's definitely like, but it's
we
definitely a part of
probably
the episode,
shouldn't
and
go
that's
too
what sets
far
me
into
off.
that
I
while
mean,
we're recording.
it's worth noting that they deliberately changed that from Harlan Ellison's original draft, and he was pissed. He was really, really pissed.
Right?
He can't
Um,
stand Star Trek. Harlan Ellison, by the way, was very famous for going to a convention and what was it he said? It was like Star Wars is for kids. Star Wars is for kids. Star Trek is pretentious twaddle. The best science fiction show of all time is Doctor Who.
Yeah, that was actually written in front of the old black books.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
well, since we were able to bring that back to Doctor Who, any other thoughts before we wrap up, guys?
No.
This has been a very loopy episode, hasn't it?
Although I have not given it my rating yet.
Yeah, we have not given our ratings yet. I believe Flynn's the only one that's given a rating so far.
And I would say for a pilot, I'll agree with him. 5 out of 5 works as a pilot. As a serial, I don't know.
I would say
I rate them entirely separately. Like the first episode, 5 out of 5. The next, I give a 3 out of 5.
I can agree.
I think Flynn's a little generous with the cavemen. I definitely agree with Unearthly Child, the first episode, the / pilot being a definite 5 out of 5. That is a very good episode. But the cavemen, oh my word. 3 is actually being a little too nice to it. Unless you're really into the Bee Gees, which I occasionally am, even this felt really dry and boring. So I'd probably give it a 2 at best.
Okay, well, I'm not going to be as generous with you on the first episode, giving it only a 4.5. There is still a little room for improvement, but not much. It is pretty much as good as you get.
And the cavemen?
I would probably go with the 3. It was an episode. It happened. I had trouble, like I said, staying awake when I was a kid, but I have no such problem these days. But it doesn't grab me.
Which is why I gave it a 2. That's the main problem that you need to have addressed.
3 to me is average. That's middle of the road.
Yeah.
This is pretty average.
Yeah.
I've seen average stuff out of original Who that was better than this. Can't name any of them at the top of my head, but I've seen average better than this. But that's not I thought.
This happened. That's pretty much my opinion of the later 3 episodes. It happened.
It happened. We're not exactly proud of it, but it happened. And then the dogs afterwards completely makes up for it.
Audience, though, it had not the greatest ratings, but certainly not the worst. People weren't tuning it out. But then, of course...
Then again, what else did they have on TV at the time?
Then, of course, this was followed by the Daleks, or the Mutants, the Dead Planet, whatever you want to call that particular serial line.
Yeah, actually, I originally saw it titled as The Mutants. I'm like, huh?
Yeah, but then but they stopped using that because
the Random Off
Doctor
Tarkin and the Daleks.
Mutants.
Oh.
And really, if it hadn't been for the follow-up serial, we would not have 20-odd seasons of Doctor Who, and then it maybe would have lasted 3 or 4. It would have lasted until probably Hartnell left, and then it would have just ended.
And if Terry Nation had written the TV movie, we might have gotten an extra 10 seasons.
Maybe. Wasn't he dead by then?
He might have been.
Terry Nation didn't. No, Terry Nation was alive. I don't know when he passed away, but I know he was alive enough to have to okay Remembrance of the Daleks.
Yeah, no, we were talking about the 96
1997. So
movie.
he
Oh, 97, sorry.
1997. So
Sorry.
he would have made it past the movie. I don't know if he was in any condition to write at that point or not.
He might not have been.
He was in ill health in his later years.
So yeah, he was probably not well enough to really do anything about it
He was
a couple
he was,
years in
he was, he
advance,
was,
On Blake 7 at the time.
he was working on a revival attempt of Blake 7.
which fell apart, and now I hear they're trying to do it again.
Hey, Blake 7 is decent science fiction.
I believe one of my reviewers considers Blade 7 to be the sister sci-fi show to Doctor Who.
I'll admit the original ending to Blake 7 is probably one of the most depressing episodes I have ever seen of anything in my entire life. But the rest of the series is not bad. I always enjoyed Blake 7.
I've never seen it.
Very 70s.
It's 70s, early 80s British science fiction. And it was written by Terry Nation, so
And edited by Chris Boucher, I think. Who also wrote a couple Doctor Who stories.
but the original
Some three
premise
very good ones.
is basically take the Federation from Star Trek and make it corrupt and evil.
Mhm.
And then
Which is why they say Firefly was based off of Blake 7.
then take 7 people, put them in a ship, and have them be freedom fighters. And that's Blake 7 in a nutshell. Oh, and the ship is technically more advanced than anything the Federation has.
Which
So
is
are we
why
basically
they
done with Unearthly Child, then?
I
We're
would say we are.
I guess
think
so.
so. There's not much else to say about that.
Yeah, it's short and kind of plotless.
Watch the first episode. You could skip the rest and watch the Daleks.
The first 10 minutes of the next episode is part of the pilot, I think. But
Yeah, oh yeah, some of the lines in the first couple minutes of the next episode are good, but then it
Captured by the cavemen.
falls down.
It's now time to get a nice cheese sandwich.
Shaking your bones.
that, guys. Until next time.
Okay.
Later.